So hey, I bet you don't know what today is. Today is the second anniversary of the closing date on my very first mortgage. So 2 years ago today, I spent a whole bunch of time in a lawyer's office signing a whole bunch of stuff and making small talk, which surprisingly, I'm not very good at. So to commemorate this very special occasion, I thought that I would take you back down the path of my life to show you all the places that I've been to get to where I am now. Think of it as a little bit of a get bent history lesson. Oh, we're coming up on the first place pretty soon, so I better stop and turn the camera around. Onward, driver. This is White Oaks. This is near Hagersville. Way back when, it used to be an army base. And this is the houses here are where the soldiers lived. But the army camp disappeared long before I came along. And this was a group home setting where the people who worked at the group home lived in these houses. This is the first house that I ever lived in. I don't remember it, I was 10 months old. It was used to be green back then. There's a picture of my sister raking leaves in the backyard though. See? That's how my sister rakes leaves. She's the one in the yellow. My first house. Sorta. Okay. All these houses had group home workers living in them. I don't remember any of this though, so don't ask me what it looks like. When I was 10 months old, my parents decided to try living in Brantford and commuting to White Oaks. I don't remember living here, but I did hear stories about causing my mom endless anxiety and panic by being able to escape whatever harness that she put me in. Remember, this is back when parents like to tie their kids up. So the most memorable time I did this was, I mean, no matter what it was, I could escape it, and I would take off running down the street. But the one time I did it, I decided to rip all of my clothes off first before taking off running down the street. Now, there will not be a repeat performance. But we lived here about a year or so, and then moved back to White Oaks. Now, we're coming up on, my parents moved for a bit, and when they came back to White Oaks, they lived in this house just up here with me when I was about 2. It was called the brown house then. The other one's the green house. This one is the brown house. It's obviously not brown anymore. House 29. Now, over here, you don't have to stop, but over here is where the houses, where the group home kids lived in. And behind them is where the army base was. Was not an active working army base back then. And that's White Oaks. A whole city block worth of houses nestled together in the middle of nowhere. See? Brought you here before. This is the schoolhouse, where I spent a good chunk of my childhood, from the ages of 2.5 to 9 years old. So, my dad decided to leave the White Oaks group home and start his own group home out of his own home, something he did for the next 20 years. So, this is where it all started. This is where all of my rose-colored childhood memories also come from. I'm sure some of you have some fond memories of this place as well. I'll always be a country boy at heart. Some part of me is still sad that we left, but that's the way it goes. It's weird being here though, I have to say. Everything's so much smaller. Where's the house? I can't see in the sun. It's really bright today. This is the first place I can remember living outside of Hagersville. We moved to this apartment building in Brantford when I was 9. And under unfortunate circumstances. And I did not handle the adjustment very well at all. I was 2 grades ahead in school. I was just about to hit puberty. In a new town, in a new school for the first time, and needless to say, the kids were not kind. But it is true though, that the friendships that you make when you're a dork are the friendships that last the longest. Because I have most of the friends, I mean it helps that there weren't that many of them, but I have most of the friends that I made while I was here still in my life. Thanks to Facebook, of course. My dad decided to start another group home, so we moved to this house on Marlborough Street and he put a bunch of foster kids in the basement. We didn't stay here long though, and we never really settled in. But the best part about living here, my walk to school in grade 8. Bam! This is the house I lived in near Burford. I was really looking forward to moving back to the country, and I spent my first year of high school here. When Burford still had a high school, that is. It was a really old house though, and it didn't look like this back then. I must admit, they fixed the place up pretty good. It was really old, red brick, and it looked pretty much like I imagine how it did when they first built it in the late 1800s. See? Just like in Hagersville, there were ghost stories here. See? Boo. And just like in Hagersville, I was sad to leave. Now, I know I've brought you here before too, but I think it's appropriate that the 2 places that I lived the longest are the 2 places that get a Get Bent revisit. I spent 7 years here, from July of 1990 to June of 97. I spent most of high school here. I got my first car, my first job, a lot of firsts here, good and bad. By 1997 though, we were all in agreement that the bad was outweighing the good. So my dad, investment planner that he is, went and bought a house and moved me here. This is the first place I lived on my own, in the first floor and basement. I did pay rent too. But let me tell you, I did have fun. I worked at the grocery store a couple blocks away, and then eventually I also did work for my dad, which is something I did on and off for the next several years. But I was young, I was just single, figuring out who I was, and I did, to excess, for 2 years. It wasn't a very clean place. And I did it all with this staring me in the face across the street. See, this was, I lived across the street from the school, ironically, where I went when I was a dork. So needless to say, hearing the squealing children at recess and lunch was unpleasant. It's a house of God now. But I wasn't single for long, so I decided to make it count. So if the last place is where I struck out on my own as a wayward teenager, this is where I gladly relinquished my independence as a young adult. It was here at this apartment building in North London town. Just a stone's throw from Masonville Mall, where I first lived as a non-single person. Right up there. Far right-hand side, fourth from the top. This was an important time in my life. We saw the Millennium in here. A good chunk of my music collection comes from this time. I look back fondly on what I can remember. I worked nights at the gas station behind the building over there. And so couple that with being part of a new couple, and I got fat here. We moved here, to the top of that house over there. We moved back to Brantford for a 4-month blink and you'll miss it experience on the top of that house, on the top of St. Paul Ave. There it is! The 5 miniature rooms were way too small for all of our stuff. So, the thing I remember the most, besides the fact that my addiction to Big Brother started here, was living among mountains of boxes that were never unpacked. Oh, and when the toilet backed up and flooded into the landlord's apartment below. But it couldn't have happened to a better guy, though. He was arrested for drunk driving a few years later. I called this place in Strathroy home for 5 months. Well, I called it home on the weekends for 5 months, while I stayed at my parents' place in my old bedroom while I worked during the week. I don't have a lot of fond memories of living here. Not for many reasons actually, but not least of which because of the one of the coldest winters I remember on record, the record snowfall, living with a furnace that didn't work properly. Thankfully it didn't last long. This was very much a transitional residence out here on the Grey Street extension in Brantford, which is now just Grey Street since they connected it to the rest of Grey Street. It wasn't long before our sprightly little 5'2" bearded Duck Dynasty looking Santa Claus elf of a landlord came up and told us that they were converting the tiny apartments into tiny condos, and we'd have to buy one if we wanted to stay. We didn't. We stayed here 6 months. Trees are new. This was the second time my dad bought a house and moved me into the first floor and basement. I'll admit, it was nice to be able to finally settle down after moving so many times and sit in one place for 3 years. We didn't have a lot of money though, so when the car died about a year in, we couldn't afford to get another one, so I walked a lot. After living here a while, we left again and moved under unfortunate circumstances, not least of which was living across from this. Catch a Buzz. Upscale establishment, tavern. But I did learn a lot. And living here and moving out of here was where I finally became an adult and learned how to fend for myself without my parents' assistance. First thing we did when we moved was buy a car. This is my in-laws' place in Strathroy. I lived in their basement for 5 months, but I still prefer to think of it just as my in-laws' place. See, just like my first time in Strathroy, it really wasn't a very good time in my life. This time around, I worked 10-hour days and commuted over an hour each way, back and forth up the 401. I still smoked at the time, and it was again in the winter, and again a frigid winter. So basically my most vivid memory of living here is freezing my ass off in an enclosed gazebo in the side yard with the space heater and sleeping a lot. So this is where my 10 years in hell, or Kitchener, started. In living in a shoebox, as my one friend so graciously called it, on the top of this house on Cedar Street. As with any other place I lived, it turned into a huge stepping stone in my life. See, no one bothered to tell us, since we weren't from here, and we didn't know, that Cedar Street is known as Kitchener's crack alley in many circles. And we still couldn't escape shady landlords. You might sense a pattern emerging, but the shady landlord here, we found out, was operating a brothel out of the downstairs apartment when we saw them getting carted out and arrested. There always was a lot of foot traffic going in and out. We just never knew why until then. My dog died here, so not a great place to live. For 2.5 years. I went through 3 jobs here, but it wasn't all bad. The third job I got here was with BlackBerry, and so it didn't take me long to figure out, just a couple months, that it was time to make another step forward in my life. So, after 2.5 years, we decided to trade one crack den for another, and moved ourselves over to the murder capital of Kitchener, which is in the West End near Westmount and Victoria. I'm pretty sure that if someone's going to get killed, it's probably going to be somewhere around here, so this will be real quick. We spent 2 years here, and with my new job and added income, this is where my 10-year going to buy a house plan started. Turned into 8 years actually, so I was doing pretty good for myself. There's a nice woods over there too. It's pretty nice to walk around in, and it's about the only nice thing that's around here. It's pretty safe too, because crackheads don't know their way around woods. Our final destination brings us here. I decided to jump in feet first, right back into the heart of downtown Kitchener. And just like the movie Final Destination, this was a real horror show. The landlord would break into people's apartments and steal their opioids, and that's just one example. It is the longest I stayed anywhere outside of my parents' home though, for 6 years. Let me tell you though, it was not for the ambiance. We watched a lot of TV here, and it did work for what it was meant to be, which is a holding pattern, so that I could sit on my ass and save money, which I did. We also lived on the 16th floor. See, that's the enclosed balcony up there is where we lived. So I walked up the stairs here or actually not every day, but 3 times a week I did this, and so I lost 25 pounds here. I bought a house here, and the rest is history. Finally, after all these years, home sweet home. So, 19 places in 19 minutes or so. But you're gonna have to wait if you want to hear about this one. In 2 weeks, I will be commemorating moving in here to the home of all homes, the home after all those other homes. Hopefully, my forever home. I'll tell you all about it in 2 weeks. Tune in next week for some unrelated bullshit.